what should we invest into, Microsoft or Google right now?
Everyone wants the tickers, right? So
Yeah, talking about wealth management.
Welcome to Roll Right In with Fabian and Ole, and to our Davos 2023 edition.
You are born in Mexico, I didn't know that.
Indeed, yeah.
So your mother is Irish and your father is a Mexican.
Correct. Yeah.
So somehow later you moved to the United States and you moved around a lot. I read more than 10 times. You went to law school, you have a PhD.
JD, doctorate in law, yes.
A JD at Suffolk University from Boston. Yeah, and then you went from there, you went into the wealth management. By doing this, you got a certified, you became a certified wealth advisor.
Correct.
You worked with Goldman Sachs, with JP Morgan, with Fidelity, very impressive. And that made up that mix between words from law and numbers from wealth management.
Precisely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then you decided to found your own company.
Tell us, you're here in Davos. What are your experiences so far? What are some of the themes that you hear people discussing?
Yeah, so it's good to be back. I mean, I think there's a lot of excitement on the promenade because the last time everyone was here was back in 2020, right? And I don't think any of us could have expected what happened in 2020 between then and now. And so I think the joy of all being back together, the excitement, and of course the new, fresh, innovative topics that are top of mind for everyone, namely, a lot of technological-oriented topics as, artificial intelligence, things of the like, also the future of finance as it relates to ESG and sustainability. So the past couple of days have been a lot of fun, seeing familiar faces. Just came from a breakfast talking about AI with Microsoft's CEO, and so that was quite fascinating over at the Belvedere Wall Street Journal event. And so it's very exciting. There's lots of newness, and I think this year we all feel that there will be a ton of innovation on a go-forward basis, and everyone's here to collaborate and connect. So,
what did he say, the CEO of Microsoft?
He was talking about how ChatGPT will impact the workforce, right? And he thinks that it will be a value add versus a detractor, right? So a lot of people are paranoid that we're all going to lose our jobs to the machines, to AI. What does that mean for society? But he says, no, listen, it's actually a value add because people who don't know about XYZ skill can simply ask this tool and be informed. So it was very positive.
So the GPT-3, when this came out, I just shared that with my kids. And that was probably not that good idea because my daughter just told me that when they get questions from history, she just punched it into GPT-3,
right,
and it spits out the answer.
Yeah.
So what does Nadella say concerning these kind of changes? So I think that's pretty stressful for the teachers, isn't it?
Yes, and you see all these universities coming out and saying, if you get caught using this, you're going to be...
Yes, true.
Right?
In Australia, they just try to prevent students to use it by going back to paperwork.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, personally, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. In fact, I invite it. I think that it might be productive because it forces students to actually think about the process of learning versus getting to the end result. So we're focused more so revisiting the means to the end versus just focusing on the end, i.e. the answer to a question. So maybe your daughter gets the answer to the question, but let's talk about why, right? So sometimes it's helpful to know what the answer is, to backtrack and understand how to get from point A to point B. So I think it could be productive. At the end of the day, experience is what trumps all. Yeah. Right? And so answers are lovely, but understanding how to get there, I think, is
I think imperative. So too. Yeah, that's. I think that's really crucial. I think if all the answers are there through technology, the capability of being able to ask the right questions this will be the number one faculty that you have to have, right?
Right.
So you need to know what it is that you want to know from the machine.
Right.
And then you need to know how to frame your question in a way that it brings you to your desired state, right?
Exactly.
A lot of people are afraid of what is happening there, right?
Yeah, and I think it's obviously a worthy conversation to have. It's imperative, right? It's critical.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, I think that the need for understanding the processes of how to get from point A to point B will never. The integrity of that process will always be preserved. And actually, it's funny because I was thinking with this book coming out in May, I'm like, wow, am I one of the last ones who will publish a book without access to this tool? Or at least it wasn't really top of mind for me during the writing process. So.
But anyway, it's a super powerful tool. When I used that the first time, I started using it like Google, and I said, and then I realized chat. So you just talk back to a person,
right.
And I mean, this is a real innovation, and it's here to stay, and it has a tremendous. But in all this AI linked to language has enormous potential.
They just released ChatGPT a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. Now we have this gathering here in Davos, in-person gathering, and that we have themes nowadays which are globally discussed from one day to the other, and then also global leaders coming together discussing the impact.
Right.
Right. So also the timing of this event now is very, very interesting if you think about it. And how important do you think are these in-person gatherings nowadays?
I think they're critical. They're incredibly powerful, right? So at the end of the day, it's like we can have all these advancements in technology and updating our software, so to speak, but ultimately we need to keep our own software updated, right, internally, and that happens by virtue of conversation and seeing the nuances in body language and communication and all of these types of things. It's part of the human experience. And so I think that nothing will ever solve for the human experience, is my personal opinion. But you're right, the speed at which things are happening, because this just kind of came into the zeitgeist, if you will, a few weeks ago. Yeah. And here we are with a formal conversation on the topic. That's one thing he did mention, is that there's going to be an increasing, obviously, need to learn and relearn, right? And to be able to pivot and to have this neuroplasticity to understand how to get from point A to point B, how to think about different concepts differently. So it's interesting. We're in a very dynamic time.
Oh, I would like to add on this. If you think of the decision of this university in Australia, they made that they only want to allow paperwork now for their students. It requires a very agile mindset for all institutions all over the world nowadays, because you have to react so spontaneously to what is happening, right?
Yes.
And it gets ever faster and faster and faster. So I think agility is really one of the core principles of our time, and no one can hide from it.
No one.
No,
I agree.
Even Google. Imagine you're Google, and you know all of the world is talking about Google is in the lead of AI, and then OpenAI comes out with this GPT-3, and before it's really you have understood what this is, Microsoft jumps into the game.
Right.
So talking about that. What should we invest into, Microsoft or Google right now?
Everyone wants the tickers, right? So
talking about wealth management.
Now that we have you here in this discussion,
exactly.
we need to take advantage of that.
Exactly.
We have to say, Ole and I, we did not so good a job in 2022 what is managing our wealth concerns. So we were pretty excited to then to have these intros and then talk about a little bit Davos, but now we want to talk about wealth management.
Yes. All right.
We would like to learn, we are not wealth managers, so we really like to learn from you now.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
What's going on?
All right, perfect. So I think what's interesting is that a lot of this innovation, right, is also impacting the infrastructure or the constructs of our financial markets. So, for example, in 2018, you had a new sector added to the S&P, which was focused on communications, and that's where the FANG stocks got kind of reorganized and underneath this new sector. And the reason why this new sector was created was because the way that we're communicating these days is fundamentally different and changing. And so what that means is that there's new companies coming online that people are investing in for investment return, right? And so it's interesting how the S&P even added a new sector, right, to reflect this evolving space. So that's fascinating. I think last year was really difficult for everybody in the markets, right?
Okay, Ole, everybody.
From at least from a public markets perspective, right? And so we're definitely in a dynamic time. I think on a go-forward basis for 2023, everyone is a bit, sitting on their edge of the seats and thinking, when are we going into recession? Right? And so that's the topic on everyone's mind. And I think a lot of people are sitting with a lot of cash on the sidelines, whether it be to cover expenses or unforeseen events, things of the like, and or to have the cash on hand or dry powder, since we're in Davos, to invest and deploy that capital when they find a really good investment opportunity. So I think people are staying agile and nimble, both in terms of switching from to paper, right, for taking their tests, like the kids in university, as well as investors, staying agile and nimble as well. And, the thing with up and down markets is it's a really opportune moment for investment managers to take advantage of tax loss harvesting. So that's a benefit as well, right? So there's always in my mind, there's always a silver lining in terms of what's going on in the markets, because you can reposition your portfolio.
You work for JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. They're always bullish, so they always find some silver lining very far away. So.
Yes, if you look outside, maybe you see it. But but no, I think it's a really good opportunity to kind of position portfolios, right, and have the conversations and figure out, okay, what's your goal? Why? What's your risk tolerance? How have you felt in 2020 when the world kind of collapsed? What was your reaction, right? That's a good barometer for what your risk tolerance is, and volatility, and to know thyself and know what investment philosophy works well for you.
But it just comes to my mind. We had a podcast last week with Alex, and then he mentioned that in the VC area there's so like mountains of money around, just dry powder, ready to get invested. And I was like, dry powder, cash, okay. Now you mentioned also that there's a lot of cash positions.
Right.
I just read on your website that the best way to build your wealth is by keeping your money invested.
Yep.
That's exactly what Uber has told me. And whatever podcast I was listening now for 3 years, everybody says you have to be invested. Now suddenly, when we have basically the crash, I hear there's a lot of powder, dry powder, and there's so good investors that have a lot of cash. How come?
You mean, so I think a lot of people like you all have had success, a lot of innovation going on, selling of companies, right, taking advantage of certain opportunities. So with that cash, people have it on hand and they're waiting for the right opportunity, maybe to start a new business, right, or to get into venture when what's it called? The valuations kind of come down, right? And I think everything right now is finding an equilibrium, which is productive for the investment arena. It's productive for investors. So we're right-sizing all these industries at the moment, which I think is healthy.
I think so too. But my question was, what did I miss when everybody was telling be invested, and then there's a missing link to me. I don't know how you think, but there's a missing link, and suddenly they say, oh, we have a lot of cash. We're on the sideline, and now we're ready to invest when everything is low. So there's a period of time where they have sold their investments and have the cash by the side, and when I just missed that moment.
Maybe it's your strategy needs to be really twofold. So you need to be invested, of course, but you need to have a good fraction of your money just still for opportunities.
Precisely.
I think that's really important, and I think nowadays it gets even more and more important. I mean, you want to hedge all the risk through having stable investments, but then as now new technologies emerge, you want to be able to react on what is happening, right? So I think it needs to be twofold at the end.
So when we now look back, please go more in details, but I think when there was clear that Powell is going the hard line and really goes up with these interest rates, that was the moment where Dalio and all these guys sold their assets and went into money. Did you do the same?
I'm staying invested. I've stayed invested.
Like you said on your website.
Yeah, well, that's. Okay. I think too, some people might have sold to capture the losses, right? Because that was productive for their investment strategy. So when they sold, they just kept the proceeds in cash, waiting to invest at an opportune time. So that could also explain why people have a little bit of cash on hand. And also, the real estate market been quite productive and attractive for many years. It'll be interesting to see what happens this year with the real estate market because interest rates are so high. So that's going to be interesting. But I think, at least in the US, in my mind, and I'm based in Miami these days, where the real estate has been utterly incredible. I mean, it's just upward trajectory. But I think it is sort of zip code specific, right? Because people are moving around, for example, speaking of money, to Miami for tax purposes. So it's a very multifaceted landscape at the moment because people are also reorganizing their lives and reevaluating what they value and pivoting themselves accordingly.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point that you make here. Also, if we look at the future of work, I've just recently been to New York and I visited a friend who is running the office there for Business Insider. And so we had lunch together and he said, hey, why don't you come by to the office? And they have 2 stories there in a skyscraper. I show you around a bit. So I came to this office and there was one more person in this office. It would hold 800 people. There was one other person. I'm not lying, really, one person. And he said...
Like a ghost office.
Yeah, but it was in the middle of the day. And he said it's so hard to get people back into the offices. Yeah. But still, the city was full.
Elon came.
Yeah, yes.
With a sake.
Yeah,
and Hediger as well.
They want to get them all back, right?
Yeah.
But how do you do that? If you force them, then they move on to another employer. And so... I found that so fascinating because the people still were in the restaurants. They were there. They spent their money. The wealth is there still, but the work is changing. The work environment is changing entirely. And again, this speaks to this principle of agility, and also to the question of what is wealth.
Right.
And you, as you just said, you wrote a book about this, and you're offering 5 principles in invisible wealth. Could you elaborate a bit on these principles for us?
Sure, and I'll just take a step back quickly just to acknowledge the anecdote because you're right, it's incredibly powerful that everyone is switching to remote work these days. And again, placing a premium on flexibility and agility, both in terms of where they're living, how they're working, how they're organizing their lives. And of course, you need to work to make money, to invest money, to then create financial wealth. So the work component of this conversation is critically important as we're reimagining work. And we're also, what we saw in the US particularly, and I speak from the US perspective because a lot of my statistics and research are just focused there for the time. But the Great Resignation happened, and essentially millions and millions of people, myself included in those statistics, left their corporate jobs to pursue other areas, more entrepreneurial, right, more aligned with their interests and their goals. So it's really fascinating. So the 5 principles. So the first, as you kind of alluded to earlier, it's like, okay, the wealth of money and investment, of course, we want to have a lot of money and we want to invest correctly, but keeping your money invested, i.e. keeping it invisible, hence invisible wealth, is how you create wealth, right? One way that you create wealth. And obviously the power of compounding is critically important. Einstein once said that compounding is probably one of the eighth wonders of the world, so I think the current wealth narrative is such that money is simply an abundance of financial means, right? That the two are merely one in the same. And I think that that's an antiquated old narrative. There are evolutionary reasons for that, I believe, that I detail in the book. But I think it's time for us to essentially decouple that and think about wealth as a multidimensional and multi-definitional structure, hence the 5 principles.
More holistic.
More
from
holistic.
The perspective of how you live.
Yeah, and so for example, so the next one is wealth of health. And so this folds in technology, right?
Yeah.
So of course, after the pandemic or during the pandemic, health is top of everyone's mind, right? We are placing primacy on health. So if we think about technological innovations and health, we think about all the tools that we have, for example, wearables, right, that provide visibility into the invisible markers of health. So in my mind, the invisible markers of health are sometimes more important than the visible markers of health, right? So it's interesting that we have technology kind of bringing visibility to health in a way that otherwise wasn't available to us, that makes it more personalized, right? So we're able to monitor our blood oxygen level. We're able to see into microbiome. We're able to think about mental health and spiritual health, which are intangible, invisible forces, but also influence our health. So, for example, that's kind of the context and color of what these principles outline.
That's really interesting. And then you have 3 more. I would like to talk about all of them, if that's okay for you, because I think it's super interesting.
Yeah.
I just have a question.
Sure.
How did you come from the wealth, like financial wealth, money, and like that comes from working? So why did you then come directly to the health?
I think money, you mean the sequence, right? So you're asking what begs the sequence. I think first and foremost, the first part of the book kind of tees up the evolution of money and the evolution of the economy, and therefore the evolution of the word and etymology of wealth. So naturally we land at money and investment, and I think that that's kind of primary for everyone's mindset. So I wanted to acknowledge that first and get that kind of out of the way so that we can get to more abstraction. So that's why the sequence is that way.
Yeah, it makes sense, absolutely. Your third is knowledge, status, and influence. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so if we think about knowledge, that there's so much information out there right now, right? And so when we take in information, we are enabling ourselves to become knowledgeable in a space. And essentially information coupled with experience equals knowledge, right? And so knowledge is critically important for making money, right? Because you have to know things to make money. And the knowledge doubling curve is increasing rapidly. So that means that, like we were discussing earlier, you have to be able to pivot fast because things are changing and you need to relearn everything. So the acquisition of knowledge has changed. Our tools for acquiring and what we're wanting to learn and know are changing as well. And so that ties into money. Status and influence are constructs that relate to wealth, I think, inherently, right? You can, in my mind, buy your way into status, for example. But for me, ultimately, it's what do you do with the status and influence that's most important, right? And so how are you wielding your power? Are you wielding your power in a productive way for society? And there's wealth and value inherently in that. So that's where it starts to get a bit more abstract. But we talk about knowledge, the importance of knowledge for wealth creation, the knowledge economy, podcasts included.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people learn things every single day?
Oh, absolutely.
Through podcasts.
Time, energy, and experiences is number 4.
Yeah, so as many say, and I agree, time is our most valuable resource, right? And so how are we deploying our time? And again, to tie it into the future of work or the current state of work, it's do we want to be commuting, wasting an hour each day going to and fro, or are there better ways to utilize our time? So I think the way that we interface with time is changing as well, just as there's efficiencies and optimizations by virtue of technological advancements that are coming to market. And energy, of course, how you spend your time influences your energy levels, right? Which is also critical and imperative for knowledge acquisition and for making money. So as you see, like everything is interconnected, right?
Absolutely.
But so we talk about energy, and energy from a scientific perspective is work, right? So it's tying all these kind of themes together and experiences of how people, particularly millennials this year or recently, are spending so much money on experiences. I mean, with your conference, right? People seek this conference out, World Web Forum, for a reason, to go for the experience and to connect with influential people and to gain knowledge, right? So what we're prioritizing is changing over materialistic goods.
And I think we will see an absolute rise in the importance of these kind of gatherings. As you just said, also with making the connection, but having the experience.
Right.
So being at a nice location, meeting interesting people, discussing the topics of our time. I think this will be more important than ever because this has been subtracted from our lives during the pandemic.
Yep.
So we started appreciating it even more. I think the Davos, or the value of Davos 23 or whatever other conference is much more visible because of the 2 years not happening.
Yes.
Right? So if we would have just gone on like this for years and years, we would have just maybe, we wouldn't have changed anything, I guess. But now everyone really seeks for experiences.
Right.
But you also mentioned, that's the last point, relationships. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so relationships, it's experiences. Okay, we can have experiences by ourselves, but we like to have experiences with other people, of course. We're human, we're wired for connection. And so one aspect or point that I make in the book, and I bring this up because this is how much I feel it's important, is the concept of relationship capital. I actually trademarked the term in the US. But relationship capital to me means spending time, energy, and building trust between people is ultimately what makes things move forward, right? So one quote that I remember from Davos 2019, and I don't know who said it, but whomever said it, it's brilliant, that relationships move at the speed of trust. So without trust, your relationships don't move, right? So it's that relationship capital, this intangible asset that really fuels and supports progress. So, and so, yeah, relationships, I also talk about and believe relationship with self is critically important and is the foundation for relationships with other people. So it's important. We work with people. We want to work with people. Even if we are entrepreneurs on our own, we need to interface with others, or at least their ideas. So relationships are critically important.
Let us talk a bit about risk.
Yes.
Can you share a couple of thoughts about your own risk-taking behavior?
So before I get into me personally, I'll just make one comment in terms of the acquisition of financial wealth, right? And its importance and its tie-in to risk and innovation. So in my mind, I think everyone should pursue making money, right? I'm not here to say that money is bad. I think everyone should be as wealthy as they possibly care to be. And what that ends up doing is enabling innovation, because people are more inclined to take risk when they have a security blanket of cash, investment, whatever the case may be. So with financial security comes the ability to take risk in other arenas and to create for self and others. So I think it's incredibly important for innovation and risk-taking. So me personally, I mean, as you guys know, I was in private wealth management for over a decade and great institutions, and I truly left a really great company, a really great team, and a really great clients. But ultimately, I knew that what I wanted to do was outside of that box for the moment. And so I threw up all my cards. Everyone looked at me and they said, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this? You have such a great setup." But I think ultimately listening to your own internal compass, as cheesy as that might sound, is important. And you need to take risks in life, because one of the main fears I have, and I'd say that this is the reason why I'm open to risk, is to play the tape forward. I'm 80 years old, and to look back and be like, I wish I tried, or I wish I took the risk. And I think that's my biggest fear, to be quite honest with you, is to not take a risk for something that I really want.
So not that you fail as an entrepreneur, as a young entrepreneur, but that you feel sad if you would have not taken the risk.
Yeah, and I think, listen, failure is information. It's just feedback, right? And you pivot. I mean, even when I was at Fidelity, I created a prototype and a proof of concept for an enterprise solution. And they advanced that into incubation, which was great. Did they end up continuing on with that exploration? No. So I failed in a way in my exploration.
You were frustrated?
I mean, of course, whenever you start something, you want it to be successful, right? Is it an enterprise solution that's now operating in Fidelity? No, but I had the experience. It was great insight, great feedback, great knowledge. You just need to understand yourself and where you're willing to take risks, both in terms of how to make money and also how to invest money. So I think so long as you're doing what you want to do, and more power to you, that's wealth.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good last sentence. Thank you very much for your time, for being with us.
Of course, my pleasure.
For everyone, the book will be released May 9th, 2023. It's called Invisible Wealth. I found it really fascinating. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been so much fun.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Yeah.